hello everyone. I am not going to say good morning because most people are watching the VOD of this because no one wanted to wake up this early. I appreciate every single person in this room right now for being awake because I had to be awake. Today I'm going to be talking about wiki.gg's improved main page framework. I'm using the word framework because this is not an extension. It's some Lua wiki text, JavaScript, a little bit of JavaScript, it's not reliant on JavaScript to load stuff. That's utility stuff, I promise, and a bunch of CSS. And this is how we design main pages on wiki.gg. If you're not familiar with wiki.gg, we are a wiki farm, wiki platform. We have about 1,500 wikis. I've been saying for a while that we have about 1,500 wikis, so we probably now have about 1,600 wikis, somewhere around there, which means that when we're spinning up a wiki, we are not going in and then saying, okay, you are our single most important wiki. For the next 2 months, we're going to be dedicated just to helping you spin up MediaWiki. We have all of these resources for you. If you have literally any question, we're going to do a bespoke thing for every single wiki. That's not feasible for us because our goal is to host a lot of wikis. And that means that we need to create tooling where our users can be mostly self-sufficient when they're setting up their wiki. So we will give them a wiki, and they will see their new wiki, and we would like if their new wiki looks a little bit better than the default MediaWiki install page. A lot of these people do not have technical background. A lot of them have never used MediaWiki before. A lot of them don't know that MediaWiki is a word. So some examples of what these things look like. These are not the default that you would see, but these are some styled versions of the main page. So these are some things that you can do with our framework if you want to. So this is an example of a wiki, Needy Streamer Overlord wiki. They did some customizations. You can see how the main page kind of looks like a main page. There's boxes, there's things that are aligned, there's different widths. This is in dark theme. One requirement for our main page is that it has to be easy to style in both light mode and dark mode at the same time. That's not necessarily through the main page mechanism. We have a whole loadout of color variables that kind of work in partnership with codex variables to make light and dark theme very easy to style. So this is the same wiki, and it's in light mode, and then I have the screenshot of the tablet mode and the screenshot of the mobile, so you can kind of see how there's a responsive design here. And we wanted it to be very easy for users to have a responsive design on their main page. This is another example. Here's a couple other examples. I wrote in our Discord and said, hey, if you have a cool example using this, please send it to me so I can put in my slides. So thank you very much to all of my users who sent me their examples. And I'm sorry to a couple wikis who sent them after my slides were done, and I did not go back and edit my slides more. So I want to talk maybe a little bit less about how this works and what it does, and more about how we designed it and what factors went into designing it. And then if you think that it sounds cool, I do have links to all of the useful pages where you can install it on your own wiki if you want to. So there's a couple of general requirements that these are not requirements for designing a main page framework per se. These are requirements for designing any feature that we are hoping all of the so no feature will be used by all of the wikis on our platform, but let's say we're hoping about 90% of the wikis on our platform are going to use a new feature. So the first thing, and I would say probably the single most important thing, is that it has to look decent by default. So if you get this feature and you see the page, say if it's the info box and you see in it, you see this copyable code to create a new info box template and nothing else. Or in this case, you see your brand new wiki and you see the default main page and nothing else. Or you want to make a nav box and you see a default empty nav box and nothing else. That has to look decent already, even though you haven't done anything. And the reason for this is that a lot of our users are super non-technical, and if they see something that doesn't work, so if I see something that doesn't work, I'm like, oh, it's probably not configured yet. If they see something that doesn't work, they're like, oh my god, this doesn't work, like everything just broke. Why did these stupid people at wiki.gg tell me to install this thing that's not even working yet? And we get a lot of questions, and it's not even anger, it's also a lot of the time it is anxiety. It is, oh my god, this is supposed to be working, why isn't it working, what did I do wrong? And the number one thing I want to avoid is people thinking, what did I do wrong? So it has to look decent by default so that you kind of have just this intuition that, oh yes, this thing was put on my wiki and I think that's a real thing. I believe that this is a thing I can use. The second requirement is that it has to be really easy to customize a little bit, and that a bit in this line is doing a lot of work. I really mean it has to be extraordinarily easy to change the word default to default as your very first edit, or whatever you want to do, where you're just manipulating one string to prove that the edit process works. So when we're looking at these examples, these are highly customized main pages. They have a bunch of content. There's tons of pages already created on the wiki that can be linked to. There's files that are uploaded. There's a border image in the CSS, right? That's not the proof that it's possible to edit. That's the, oh, this wiki has actually existed for a month now, and there's actually content, and I can make something good, right? In the first 15 minutes of a wiki existing, it's not really possible to make a helpful, complete main page. So what we want people to be able to do, or in the first 15 minutes of any tool being used, it's not going to be amazing. It's going to be, I know it works, maybe. So we want people to be able to get to that, I know it works, maybe, very, very, very easily. And then the last point is that it has to be easier to customize this significantly than to abandon the framework completely and use something else. And this one is also very important because, so on wiki.gg, probably our most well-known wiki is the Terraria wiki. Terraria is a very, very old wiki. It has a huge, huge amount of functionality, and a lot of that functionality is implemented in very legacy ways. And a new wiki will come and they will say, okay, I have made my first video game ever. I want to make a wiki for my video game. I am so excited about this. I have no idea what I'm doing. Let me copy from Terraria. And we say, probably not what you want to do actually, but it would be kind of great if that were a thing that you could reasonably do. So our goal when we're making frameworks like this is that wikis which now are new and in 5 years will be the super well-known, super complicated wiki that has all of the functionality, we want those wikis to be copyable from and still be using the same framework that other wikis are using so that you have consistency among examples, so that it's easy for us to help you, because when you say, oh my god, these 1,000 lines of code aren't working, it's the same 1,000 lines of code that the other wikis are using, so helping you is easier for us. We really want a lot of wikis doing very similar things fundamentally that they then customize in very extensive ways so that the wikis look different from each other, feel different from each other, are different from each other, but work similarly to each other. And an absolute requirement for that is that our frameworks are very, very, very extensible so that people copying the thing they know the most, that they know the best, is a possible thing for them to do. And I did say the word main page while talking about these points a little bit, but I didn't have to, right? These are very general points that anytime you're trying to roll out software that you want mass adoption for, these things all have to apply. And that's not even in just MediaWiki, right? Anytime you're making a tool that you want everyone to be using, in my opinion, these are the 3 things that you need to keep in mind. And if you do that, you'll probably make something that's pretty cool. In this case, we are doing main pages, though. So we have a couple very specific requirements about a main page. And some of these are very main page specific. Some of these are slightly less main page specific. We don't want a wall of text. We don't want it to be that when you open the main page and then you press edit, and most people are using edit with source, some people are using visual editor, it has to work with both. But either way, we don't want an enormous amount of content on the main page itself. I really do mean on the main page itself, right? Because we're going to be transcluding from other pages, so most of the content should be transcluded so that you don't have a huge wall of text, so that people don't have to scroll. If you ask me, how do I edit this page? And I say, okay, well, go into the editor and then find the place where it says MP link and change that. Well, okay, if there's 10 lines of code total on the page and half of them say MP link, it's probably pretty easy to do. If there's 500 lines of code on the page and 5 of them say MP link, you're gonna be like, oh, now I have to use like Control F, and Control F isn't working because like Wiki Editor is taking over Control F and it's not what I'm used to. And then you also get into language barriers, and it's much more difficult to do a simple thing if that simple thing is buried in a huge wall of text in the source, as opposed to if there is very little code in that one source page. So we wanted to make very sure that there is no gigantic wall of text. This is not necessarily main page specific. In general, we don't like having huge walls of text in individual wiki pages. We want the source to be relatively compact. However, that has a conflicting goal, which is that we also want it to be very obvious to know how to edit. And if we're doing all of this indirection with layers of transclusion in order to have a very simple main page, we're going to end up with, okay, well, so there's like 3 lines of code on this page, and none of them is how I edit a link or add a link. Where do I go to edit the link? And so that it was another requirement that we had to work around that in some way. That's what the JavaScript is for. So we're having people edit on subpages. It could be template pages. It could be project pages, wherever you want to edit the content. That has to be very apparent how to get there without using like the edit and then see the templates, like what templates are used on this page. Like that's 5 steps too far. It has to be really obvious. And this means that we are going to be coding our own section edit buttons in some way. A couple other points that I don't have to go into, you can read them on my slides, but we basically wanted to make sure that this was as useful as possible while being modular, while each of the modular pages in itself is useful, basically so that the amount of things that you're thinking about at any one point in time is always one page, and one page that is not doing multiple things, that doesn't have too much code on it, etc. There's a couple technical requirements because this is a wiki main page that we do need to make sure functions. Earlier on in the examples, I showed you the NSO wiki that has the same content is being displayed at different widths in different dark and light mode, and that has to literally just work out of the box with no configuration necessary. Because if any configuration is necessary, people are just going to do the default. It's not going to work. So to make it responsive like that, it has to use CSS Grid for the sections. And once we're using CSS Grid for the sections, we are using CSS for the sections. And once we're using CSS for the sections, we're making our users edit CSS. This is a scary thing that most users are not going to be able to do. So we had to figure out a way for users to edit the CSS to change the layout without actually going into MediaWiki common.css. Again, that is a gigantic wall of text. We don't want people editing that. We also don't really want people editing that in the middle because then it's harder for us to roll out updates to our default loadout and stuff, but that's additional technical detail. We just don't want people to have to say like, oh my god, I need to know CSS in order to edit a wiki. Like, and then again, the user I'm thinking about is the user who just has a panic attack and doesn't want to make a wiki anymore. And I don't want to have anyone have that experience, right? I want people to say, oh, I can make a wiki and it's not too difficult and it doesn't require coding. So we needed to use CSS Grid in a way that doesn't require people to edit MediaWiki common.css. That is relatively easy to do by having a template parameter that just does an inline style. In that case, in this particular case, I'm fine with the inline style. So it's not a difficult thing to do, but that it was a very important technical requirement when designing this framework. We wanted to be backed by CSS variables for color. Again, this is something that we kind of get for free on our platform just because we have all of these, we call it default loadout variables that work in conjunction with codex variables, and it makes it very easy to do dark and light themes at the same time. You actually get a dark and light theme by default when you spin up the wiki, which is another example of having to look decent by default. We wanted to implement this in Lua, and when I say Lua, I mean not PHP. We did not want to write an extension for this. We wanted everything to be completely wiki editor, but not sysadmin facing, because all of our users are editors and do not have server access to our wiki farm. If they want to fork our framework, we're okay with that. We would rather they make us a feature request first, and we'll see if it's something that we want to add to the whole framework. But we do want it to be forkable. We want all of the code to be visible. While it's true that a lot of our users are relatively non-technical and we want things to just work out of the box for them with very little customization, we also do want to support people who have been editing wikis for 10 years and they want to spin up this wiki for this video game they just really enjoyed and they know how to do everything. They just want to see the code and fix everything themselves. We don't want to obfuscate what's going on with an extension. We don't want to deal with updating an extension. We actually want it to be possible to fork away from us if a community gets unhappy with us. That's very important because wikis want that safety when they're deciding to host with us in the first place. And adding an extension makes that process more difficult, because then that's another piece of software that is running server side that other wikis are going to have to install if they want to fork away. So it had to be Lua. I mean, technically it could have been Wikitext, but also no. We did not want any HTML tables. It has to use CSS Grid. We don't want tables. The main page has to be very responsive. Section edit links, as I was talking about on the previous slide, section edit links are very important, because you are not going to discover subpages that have content unless you are already seeing the link directly to the subpage. And then we want these links to exist, but we also want them to be toggleable. So we permission lock the edit links to people who are able to edit the main page only, which in almost all cases is sysops only. But we want them to be toggleable so that if people will sometimes go to the main page and we will get this like, oh my God, can everyone see this edit links? So we have like just a very clear button that loads for sysops only that says toggle edit links, and then you can turn it off and you can screenshot your main page and preview it correctly. So again, a minor thing that was a requirement that we had to make sure was available when we created this. Technically, we do not have a permission-locked gadget anymore. We have a gadget that is just locked to edit so that it doesn't load for anonymous users. But the first thing that it does is check if you are able to edit the page, and if not, it doesn't load. The reason that we aren't using the built-in permission lock functionality of gadgets is that an earlier point here, when I said it must be sandboxable and translatable, if we're getting a wiki that wants to translate, they're going to say they want to translate to Korean, they're going to have a /ko temporary page as a subpage of the main page, and whoever is doing the Korean translation probably does not have sysop on the wiki, and we don't want to make having sysop on the wiki a requirement for someone to translate a wiki. We want that to just be something that any user can start translating, assuming they're not vandalizing the wiki as they translate, right? So that should be relatively non-disruptive, not require elevated rights. So we did start out with a permission-locked gadget, and then we ended up changing it specifically for that, being able to sandbox it in your user space, being able to translate it, etc. So what do we make? This is how the main page will look by default if you spin up a new wiki. I have this open. So this is actually our default loadout wiki. This is the wiki that you will get if you spin up a new wiki on wiki.gg. It will look more or less like this. There's a couple parts of this that are going to be changed a bit, right? The welcome to the default loadout wiki in the top, that's site name, right? So that'll say whatever site name is. Subject name is not a real magic word, but in our importing this to the new wiki's script, it is a magic word, and so we replace that with whatever the wiki subject is. And then there's a couple boxes, so we can, in fact, toggle the edit links, and they will show up and go away. And the edit links are relatively verbose. Deliberately, there's always a UX trade-off between making something super verbose and making something look nice, right? So it is unambiguously clear that these are, yeah, it is showing up, that these are the links that you have to click to go edit one of the sections. However, they take up a large amount of space. And maybe we could have done just a pencil, but inevitably, if we did a pencil, people would ask. So we have actually not iterated that text at all. It has always said this. And let me, where's my cursor? Whoops. Okay. So this is another screenshot. I didn't realize I was going to be able to do a demo. This gigantic wall of text that is maybe not as intimidating as it looks. It's not syntax highlighted here. It will normally be syntax highlighted when people open a new wiki. This is how the code of your brand new main page will look when you open it. And there's probably 2/3 of the text here is comments, right? We wanted to have inline documentation. A big thing for us is that if something requires you to read documentation in another location, it is inherently too difficult for the average user to use. And I'm not doing that to knock on users for not reading documentation, right? That's just a bad user experience if you're trying to do something that seems like it should be easy, but requires you to do a bunch of reading externally. And I think there's a very big seems like it should be easy versus is easy, because obviously a lot of things are very complicated and they will require reading documentation. But if a user is trying to use Lua for the first time and we say, okay, go read the Lua documentation, generally a user is not going to think, oh, I want to use Lua. That seems like it should be the easiest thing ever. I can't believe that I have to go read docs. I must just be the stupidest person ever. Oh my God, I'm not going to make a wiki, right? But what about customizing your main page? Is that something that users are going to think to themselves, oh, this should be very easy, like that should just work if I can't figure this out, if I have to like go read all this documentation and I don't understand the documentation and English is like my fourth language and I'm using Google Translate to help me understand this and it's not doing a good job of translating all the wiki text. They're gonna blame themselves for not understanding it, when really it's our fault for making something that is too complicated. So basically all of the documentation is right there in line and you see it, and we have little eyes emojis, and people actually read this. It's pretty great. So if you want to edit it, I have a little example here. I can see, I want to do a live demo, but also that's like the production new default wiki, and if I edit it and then someone spins up a wiki while I'm presenting, that would be really bad, so I'm probably not going to do a live demo. But maybe I can do with preview and not actually save anything. So we're going to add a new section called very creatively new section. Yeah, so we're adding this, and we're adding this in desktop, we're adding it in tablet, and we're adding it in mobile. Often users will add a section in only desktop and not realize that they have to do it in tablet and mobile, and we give them a warning. And sometimes users will like delete the closing curly braces, and we actually have an abuse filter for, so if you look over here where it says don't edit this line, people will sometimes edit this line, or they will delete this line. And we actually have an abuse filter that I believe it warns you but doesn't prohibit the action. But the important part is that we find out, and we track you down, and we say, why did you delete the line that says don't delete this line? And then we find out the reason, and then we try and make it better. And over time, the number of people who don't delete this line has gone down. Originally there were like 2 lines there, and it was like, don't delete after this, and it was just, so we're trying to make this like as clear as possible, and we will track people down if they delete that line. And the simple act of having an abuse filter that tells us when people do something wrong is incredibly helpful, and I extremely recommend this process to anyone who deals with a large number of wikis where you have to find out when people are doing the wrong thing. Finding that out at edit time is an amazing tool. So that whole preload, oh, what did I just click? Okay, so that whole preload that we're seeing over here, this is using the preload functionality of MediaWiki built-in tool. I personally feel that this is one of the most underutilized tools in all of MediaWiki. Preloads are really, really, really useful, and if I have a little bit of time afterwards, which I might, I'll just talk a bit about preloads and why they're so cool. But so what we have over here is an input box, and this is how the new section will look after you save or preview this code. And you know what, I'm gonna do something I probably shouldn't do and see if I can just actually demo this. So instead of external here, we're gonna have new section. We'll copy this and then paste here, and then paste here, and then we're gonna preview. So this is the new section. And then I can open this in a new tab, and then I actually get this preload over here. And you can see in the URL that this is the whole preview string, which is loading from the page. One thing I kind of wish is that like if there's a preload string here, then you have a link to whatever the preload is. But you know, most users don't need to know that. So you get this preload. You hopefully don't edit or delete the closing part of the line, or else everything will break. And the reason I clicked on this instead of create the box is that input box doesn't actually work in preview. If anyone wants to fix that, that would be greatly appreciated. So this was actually my last slide. Oh, yeah, okay. So this is the list of all of the components. If you want to install this on your own wiki, go ahead. It's licensed under CC by SA, and you are absolutely welcome to install this. I think It was designed for gaming wikis in mind, but there's nothing about the code that screams gaming wiki. Pretty much any wiki should be able to use this. One thing I do want to call out, and if you have any trouble installing it, please reach out to me. But one thing I do want to call out is that we slightly changed the way that gadget page names work. So if you try to copy the gadgets to the same page locations on your wiki, it will not work unless your wiki is hosted on wiki.gg or if you have installed our small fork of gadgets. We have a syntax that I think is a lot better. That's a topic for another talk. Everything else should just work out of the box. If anyone wants our abuse filters, reach out to me. I can send them to you. There's a lot of them that are, again, not anti-vandalism, but anti-not reading what you were supposed to read. So I think that's everything. So does anyone have any questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Megan.
Hi. So first of all, it's a creative solution to a problem that is really time-consuming for users. I'm a big fan of that. My question is, so you said early on that your goal is to make it so people don't have to stop using this framework. You want to make it extensible enough and have enough features to not have people just say, this isn't worth it, I'm going to use, I don't know, subs or something and just move away from this entirely. What is your process for, I guess, analyzing feature requests related to this, and what are the trade-offs that you think about with regard to making the framework more complicated versus saying your use case is weird enough that I don't want to bother with changing this for you?
So I'm going to answer this about Druid info boxes instead of the main page framework because we have had so few feature requests about this since we launched it that we have not had a trade-off for this yet. But it's something that I deal with a lot with Druid info boxes, which is another thing that we also want to be super extensible, etc. So my approach with Druid is that I try to, so if it seems like a feature that lots of wikis would want, I will do it. So an example of this would be that Druid has the ability to tab between images, and when you tab between images, you will also be able to tab between data in the info box, right? So if you have, say you have some card that has 3 evolutions and you want to know what is its attack, what's its HP, what's its health regen at each of the 3 evolutions. When you tab between the images, you also tab between the data. A feature request that we got that I had to think for a while whether I wanted to implement this or not was that people wanted to have independent tabs for different sections in the info box. So maybe the image information is able to tab between different skins that you have, so you want to be able to see the red skin, the blue skin, the green skin of the card. And then the stats section is tabbing between level 1, level 2, level 3. And that was a lot of code to add to make that work, especially because at that point, the image tabs already transformed all of the sections that you would have. So I had to make something that would transform just the one section while not being affected by the tabs that were already there that were going to attempt to transform everything. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. I thought about it for a while, how much work is it going to be, and I tried to just come up with, okay, what are other use cases for this? Ask in chat, is any other wiki interested in this? If multiple wikis say, yes, I'm interested in this, sure, I'll do it. If no one says they're interested in it and it seems like it's going to be a huge amount of work, I try to add a hook. And then I say, okay, so do it yourself. Maybe I'll do it for you, but it's going to be done through a hook. Currently, IMP, the main page framework, does not have any hooks, again, because we just haven't gotten many feature requests. Maybe that'll change after today. But generally, I try to, if it's something that only one wiki wants, but it's like a 1% increase in complexity, I'll probably just do it. I would say my limit is probably about 150 lines of code, at which I'm I really don't want to add 150 lines of code to this just because one wiki wants it. So at that point, I really need to know for a while. And then one other thing that I do, which I also highly recommend, is that if I am thinking about making a change to Druid, I will do my first thing that I do at that point when I have like, okay, maybe this is a change, is that I do nothing for a week. And at the end of the week, I say, okay, what have my thoughts been for the past week? How do I feel about this now? And literally just making myself wait 7 days before I do anything at all gives me a lot of perspective, and I don't make impulsive changes to the code base because I do that. And if you are ever on the fence about whether you should add a feature or not, I highly recommend doing nothing for 7 days.
Megan, that's amazing. I take the same approach when it comes to client requests. I basically wait. If it's really urgent, I do it. We need to set up the next talk, but I do have a quick question for you from Jeffrey. I guess he's watching online. And you can take this to answer it so that Tim can set up here.
Oh, yeah.
But the question, I'll just read it, and then you can take the mic from me, is who do we attribute if we wish to use this, and how often do we intend to update it?
So who to attribute, ideally you would import the revision history so that you're getting you would make an interwiki to our default loadout wiki and use the special import-export feature, and then everything is set up correctly with the attribution in the contributions. You can attribute it to wiki.gg staff if you want to additionally put something. How often you need to update it? Again, we get so few feature requests for this that you're probably fine if you literally never update it again, but maybe that will change after this talk.
Great, thanks so much. And we have our next talk online.